Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Need Some Introduction. I'm your host, Victor, and on this podcast, we go week to week, discussing something new to watch on TV, hopefully introducing all of you to something new, not only new TV shows, but recommendations along the way, movies and TV shows that are thematically linked. In this glut of content, there's always something you may have missed, and you may be watching something that you want to dig deeper into, and that's what we're here for. On this episode of the podcast, I'll be giving you my favorite shows of the year. Earlier this week, Darren was discussing his top 10 favorite movies, documentaries, TV shows, all of it. So do check out my conversation with him earlier in this week. And I won't spoil what my number one is, but I've brought in a special guest to discuss it in some great detail. My wife Kim, making her first appearance on the show. If by chance you folks know what my wife does for a living, you may suspect what my number one show is already. A couple of calls to action. Give me your top 10s, anything you want to shout out you think is not getting enough end of year attention. I'd love to hear from everybody. Send an email, needssomeintroduction@gmail.com. Send us an audio memo to the same email if you'd like, or post a comment on Spotify or on YouTube if you're listening to us on YouTube. I love to hear from all of our listeners. And on the podcast, so many things are starting just this week. We'll be discussing The Pitt Season 2, which premieres in 1 week, if I publish this on time, on HBO Max. And then immediately afterwards, just a few days later, the new season of Industry and Hijack on Apple TV+. I guess now just Apple TV. There's a new Game of Thrones spinoff that we'll be discussing to some extent, touching base on the finale of Stranger Things, and also discussing the current season of Fallout. Oh, and of course, The Night Manager also premiering this week, one of Sona's favorite shows from the past decade or so, just coming back for a second season after a full 10 years. Definitely will be discussing that with her here on the podcast. And Darren and I, very interested in checking out the new Ryan Murphy series, The Beauty, this comic book adaptation, with horror and science fiction elements. We probably, given our history with that creator's other content, won't watch all the way through, but very curious to check out. So a very busy January, which of course also includes our opinions on the Golden Globes, the upcoming Academy Award nominations, a best of movie list that is forthcoming. And all these shows will continue through February when Paradise will premiere, and we will also be discussing it here on the podcast. So follow us through your podcatcher of choice. Follow us on YouTube. It's going to be a very busy upcoming few months on the podcast. And of course, share us. Share us with your friends and family if they're watching the shows as well, or you're trying to encourage them to watch these shows along with you. Okay, so on to my best of list. It's funny, when I was first starting to put this together, I was talking to Darren saying that my choices are so consensus, they're so chalk, as they say, that it was going to be a pretty boring list. But believe it or not, my top 10 list expanded beyond 10. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to discuss over 30 shows. So be ready to write these down. I'll include in the show notes the actual list of shows, so you don't have to grab a pencil yet. All that is to say that what I thought was a pretty conventional year of TV, and as I saw the top 10s coming out, I started thinking, well, that's pretty much what I'm going to say as well. Actually, the list started to change, and I wanted to shout out specifically, I think it's the value in having these types of conversations or lists, shout out things that, to me personally, stood out and that I had some kind of personal relationship with. So I'll mention those along with the recommendations themselves. All right, so it's a long list, so I'm just going to jump right into it. All right, in the honorable mentions, a very long list of honorable mentions. Again, I thought this was going to be a very short list. It just kept growing. And I want to start with some things that I think did not get the proper amount of respect this year. Mostly because for some reason, especially with TV criticism, and you've probably seen this if you follow review aggregation sites like I do, like Metacritic, oftentimes when a show comes back for a second season or third season specifically, the longer the show goes on, they don't even get reviewed anymore. And you'll see a new show will have 50, 60 reviews on Metacritic, for example, and a returning show will have like 8 reviews. And some of these are very prestigious shows. It's not just the outlier shows. And I guess it's just the volume of commitment. I agree with this, by the way. I didn't even have a chance to fill in the blanks on missing shows at the end of the season the way I did with the movies, which I binged a bunch of them towards the end of the season to kind of fill in any kind of gaps. Something I can do if I'm 10 movies behind on what is popping up on a lot of critics' lists. the idea, if I've missed 5 or 6 or 10 shows that I wanted to catch up with, to be able to commit 20, 15, or even like 6 or 7 hours, maybe a 6 or 7 hour binge I could accommodate. But some of these longer seasons of a show, I could not fit in. And honestly, if I'm only going to watch a couple episodes, I feel like I can't give a true assessment or a recommendation. All that is to say, it's hard to fill in the blanks once you've missed stuff. But hopefully I primarily with this list want to help all of you find things that either weren't on your radar or popped up later, or I should say were forgotten along the way, and circle back to them. Okay, again, no more throat clearing. I'm going to start my honorable mention list with Black Mirror. So if you are a sci-fi fan like I am, if you are an anthology fan like I am, I like anthologies in general. So many science fiction anthologies have so many weak episodes, but are famous for having a handful of really strong ones. I think that Black Mirror, Charlie Brooker's series, originally from the BBC, eventually imported to Netflix, and of course still massively popular, especially in this subgenre. But honestly, I feel like it did this season, which I thought was very consistent, one of the most consistent seasons of the show ever, and not just with 2 or 3 episodes, but a nice solid batch of episodes. All of these episodes I would recommend to some extent. Even the ones that I think are the weakest at least have an interesting premise or are half of a really good episode and really can't nail the landing, but all of them are worth discussing. They have ideas in them that are interesting and explored for the most part in intriguing ways. So I do recommend Black Mirror, but I specifically want to recommend the episode Eulogy, which stars Paul Giamatti. You can watch this if you've never seen Black Mirror before. You can watch this all on its own. If you like this near future exploration of topics, in this particular case, there's a new technology. It's called Eulogy. I believe it's called Eulogy, just like the title of the episode. And it turns out that this woman that Paul Giamatti had a romantic affair with years before, and things hadn't worked out, has passed away, and he is this recluse to a large extent. He has not had a very satisfying life, and he really blames the dissolution of this relationship decades before on his trajectory of his life. And this technology comes along, and it allows him to record a eulogy for this person who's passed on. And there's an AI assistant that walks him through this process where he puts on these contact lenses, and he's able to look at photographs he might have or other material they have around, and he can actually start to reconstruct his own memories. So it's a really fascinating and very believable version of a technology that honestly I think is right around the corner. It is incredibly, beautifully visually visualized here. There's an incredible sequence where there's like a Polaroid. He steps into the Polaroid. You see the frame coming apart, and you see that the images around him, the people in the photograph, start to become 3-dimensional objects, but there's parts of them that are, obviously this is a 2-dimensional image, so they're in the shadows or completely blocked from the camera's view. So that part of their heads has no detail, and little by little it starts to fill in this detail as he starts to walk through this environment that is becoming 3D. Just visually, this is such an incredible representation of this particular technology. And it's what I love about Black Mirror, really deeply exploring a particular a science fiction concept, which honestly is not even a science fiction concept anymore, and just taking it like one step beyond. But more than that, where Black Mirror can be an extremely dark and cynical show, and always that's my critique of the show in general, that Charlie Brooker, especially when he writes by himself, will always lean really, really hard into the cynicism. And maybe he has every reason to, but my personal opinion, and then again, this is just personal feelings, but my personal opinion is that people are more complex than just being villains or heroes, and our relationship with technology is always also very complex, and the way technology evolves in our relationship with it is much more complex than just it's bad, which oftentimes seems to be the long and short, the message that comes from Brooker's scripts oftentimes. This one perfectly captures the complexity of a relationship we would have with this type of technology, and more importantly, through this relationship with technology, the complexity of reopening this old wound. This show, in the end, is this really beautiful meditation on all of that complexity. And we've talked about this multiple times now on the podcast. We had this in our recent conversation just this week about the life of Chuck, and with Train Dreams earlier this fall as well, another highlight movie for the year, also on Netflix. Not a science fiction film, just to be clear about that, but this idea that's coming up on multiple standout films and movies of this year, this mundane life that the vast majority of us live these mundane lives, and there is still beauty and there is still value in these forgotten mundane moments. This particular episode of the show is a real highlight this season. And once again, Black Mirror, the episode is Eulogy. The entire season, very solid, but specifically a true standout of all Black Mirror episodes. Okay, also underappreciated and also coming back following this mold was The Bear season 4. I feel like in the moment it was pretty popular. There were some people who liked it. There was some defense of it among the media. A lot of fans just tuned out or didn't even watch. We saw it in our podcast ratings, by the way, that this was, of all the Bear seasons we've covered, this one was the weakest as far as total downloads go. And do check out, it's just this one single episode where I discuss the season with Sona. So most of my thoughts are already there. But I do want to just reinforce again this idea that people like the show when it was so chaotic. And I know the show has changed into something else. But A, we have to allow the shows to change. And B, it's very intentional. The creators of the show have obviously wanted to bring this family into some degree of healing. So we can't complain when the show gives us exactly that. There was a couple episodes that could have been tighter, but you think about the episode Bears, of course, counterparted very, even in its title, counterpointed to last season's Fishes, or season 2, I guess it was. 2 episodes that are so contradictory in tone, but all to explain the trajectory of this restaurant, of this friend group, of this family, and how they are healing over time. And yeah, people did not give the show enough love. It's still a really good show, even if it's not or doesn't feel as essential as it did in those first couple of seasons. All right, one more underappreciated show, Poker Face. Season 2 of Poker Face. So many people watched season 1. I think season 2 was still very popular. And I've also outlined this on the podcast before. There's something really political, potentially, by having our protagonist, Charlie, who's a human lie detector for those who are not familiar with the show itself, and this very humane way in which she travels from town to town. At first she was on the run, minor spoiler for this season. Eventually she just does it because she wants to continue this wanderlusting lifestyle she has developed over the course of the season. But it just allows her to inject herself into pockets of society in the United States that we don't normally explore. Not the type of thing you would make a TV show about, someone who owns a funeral parlor in a rural part of the country. And I believe that episode was actually directed by Natasha Lyonne, specifically that episode I'm talking about with the funeral parlor owner, played by Giancarlo Esposito, with his wife, Katie Holmes. And of course, that just speaks to the fact, just me outlining that, the incredible star power they have on this show. But I do want to hone in just on that episode, which isn't even in my top 4 episodes of the season. But still, the artistry of it, the gothic design of it, the direct parallels to Edgar Allan Poe's stories, but also still filled with comedy. But most importantly of all, the idea that it shows both the eventual victim of the murder as well as the perpetrator of the murder in these very sympathetic ways. Something that I think is pretty unique to that show. And this is a theme I grew up watching these type of shows that were very episodic. You basically just had to see, you could just, watch Monk or Psych for one episode and you would just automatically just dip in and dip out. There's nothing serialized about the overall story, although character development did exist over a long period of time. And honestly, I didn't appreciate that much when I was younger. And of course, loved the shift towards prestige. And now maybe I need more of that. Or maybe, once again, this blend of something that is more casual to watch week to week, a self-contained storyline, but yet has elements of this prestige, this higher production values, big starry casts, and a subtle arc that goes through the entirety of the show. One huge negative on a show like this is the type of show, Poker Face specifically, that needs to kind of come out every single year. You can't make me wait 3 years for each one of these seasons. But that caveat aside, big fan of this season of Poker Face. And then a bunch of shows that some of these have made top 10 lists, some of them have not, that I think are just really great bones. And when I say that, just feels like a show that can run for a really long time if they play their cards right. The first example, maybe wrong in the one case that this is going to be, it does have good bones, but is not going to necessarily be something that could run for many years. It's Paradise, which of course is coming back for season 2. Season 1 really caught us off guard. I covered it here on a podcast because it was just intriguing to me, but I felt like it wasn't getting enough attention. Just by chance, that became a hugely successful series, very popular here on the podcast. We've discussed it here, Darren and I, that it was our biggest coverage ever on the podcast. And just such a blast. That one probably has a more of a finite shelf life, but very much looking forward to season 2. Also, very much looking forward to Your Friends and Neighbors, which we just rewatched with my mother-in-law when she was here for the holidays, and went down so easy even a second time around. A very easy binge. We did not binge it here on the podcast. Sona and I went week to week. So actually a very thematically interesting to explore this, the underbelly of this extremely privileged community, but also the toxic nature of being obsessed with the status that is represented in that show, but the complexities of marriage, of being a workaholic. So interesting themes, but like I mentioned, as a binge, went down even more easily because some of the glaring plot holes were easier to forgive when you watch it all at once. And this is a show that I think that if they play the cards right, could really run for a long time. And of course, Apple knew they had something on their hands there and immediately started shooting a second season. And that's why we're getting it so quickly, less than a year between season 1 and season 2. And 2 more from 2 of the same creative forces. Slow Horses. I did not think this was a great season of Slow Horses, but I thought it was fun to watch. Probably better as a binge than it was week to week. And I did actually do that. I binged the first half of the season and the second half of the season. Only 6 episodes, so very quick binge. You can binge the entirety of the show very quickly. This is a show that Apple's been churning out every single year like clockwork. They've already shot the 5th season. They already previewed it at the end of the current season. And it's coming in just a few more months. And 2 things. Although I wasn't in love with this season of the show, and it's been very faithful to the books, I did like what it does explore here, finally showing some of the backstory of Lamb's character. And I know people love this show for not having high stakes. I think the show's been too low stakes. It seems like it resets too much every single season. But I love the trailer for season 5, where so many things that have been set up over the course of these previous seasons. That might be, I might be wrong about what season we're in right now, but whatever the current season, upcoming season is, the trailer for that, which comes at the very end of the current season, I love that we see a lot more action, first of all, and second of all, that a lot of chickens are coming home to roost versus the previous seasons of the show. And I love seeing this all coming together. So maybe now is the perfect time to binge this show. And once again, Apple's, I think, is just going to keep doing these as long as the cast wants to keep coming back. And these casts with a 6-episode season, they're probably willing to come back every year. And from the same writer is a new show that which I'm only held off recommending it until they announced that they would renew it for season 2. It is Emma Thompson, the Emma Thompson starring Down Cemetery Road. She plays this investigator, Zoe Bohm, and there's a whole series of books from the same author as Slow Horses. So yet another spin-off series for him. Ruth Wilson stars in this season as well. I'm not sure if she's coming back for season 2, but I'm pretty certain she'll come back to this series of shows at some point. And what I will say about this show was I was pretty disappointed. The production values of the finale of this show were very good, but I was pretty disappointed with the plot contrivances required, which I assume are from the book themselves, in that final episode of the show. But the relationship between Emma Thompson and Ruth Wilson as these 2 mismatched women who get caught up in this much bigger mystery with huge consequences and stakes way beyond where they began the show. But also this exploration of Ruth Wilson's own depression and how she's been drawn into this murder case, maybe for the wrong reasons, but now has to follow through. I personally like this a lot better than the current season of Slow Horses. And I'm certainly in the minority of that, and this is not a show that's on a lot of top 10 lists, but I thought it was really entertaining, very well made. I love this brand of dark humor that runs throughout the show. Yeah, just a really enjoyable watch. And again, this goes into that good bones. I watched this show purely for the character interactions, for the comedy, the unexpected tone shifts from one scene to the other. And the overall mystery was almost inconsequential, although satisfying in the end. Except for that last episode, like I said, pretty clunky the way they executed a lot of that. Although the production values, they must have spent a lot of money on the finale of this show, a large percentage of its budget, but it was a little all over the place for me. Minus that, a really solid season of show. And I'm so happy to hear that they are bringing it back for season 2. Okay, more shows that I feel are not on the list enough at the end of the year here. One was Marvel's Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, the animated series. What a terrific season of show. If you are a fan of Spider-Man, this gives you what you like about Spider-Man. I love his friends group. And if anything, this is maybe a critique, it is incredible. The mythology, the world building that occurs in this season of the show has set up incredible stakes for season 2, which already has been instantly greenlit. By the way, Marvel was producing season 1 and season 2 at the same time. So that's definitely coming back very soon. And if anything, it's overstuffed. You end up this season introducing so many characters and with an incredible twist. It's like you have the entire initial Avengers cycle, including the time travel and all those aspects of it, all within one season of this show. But a very easy to watch show. I recommend if you have younger audiences, teens or younger adults who like Spider-Man, like the Marvel mythology. This is a way more satisfying Marvel series than any of the live action ones. So if you missed it by chance, check it out. Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. And season 2 is on its way. And 2 shows on Netflix that I feel did not get enough love. One was Black Rabbit, which I've talked about here, and I'm actually going to discuss it in the later conversation in this very episode. This story of these 2 brothers and their relationship with this restaurant that they founded, and this template that we've probably seen 100 times before of the brother who's the success and the one who's his anchor, who's always taking too many chances and always screwing everything up, and how maybe those 2 brothers are not that far apart, and what it actually says about our obsession with always wanting more no matter how much we have, and how we think that's how we're supposed to live our lives, and how all these characters in the show over time reveal themselves to all be self-sabotaging because they can never be happy with what they have. I thought this was a very interesting exploration of that, and not a perfect season at all, probably too long, has some clunky bits, but very stylish. And and I think the performances, the 2 brothers, Jason Bateman and Jude Law, 2 really fun performances. And another show, speaking of Poker Face, another show that gives you that same kind of thrill that I think was just so much fun, so funny. It got Emmy nominations, and got pretty big ratings, by the way. But Netflix has decided not to renew it for another season, was The Residence. And this is about a murder that takes place in the White House. Giancarlo Esposito, again, he's all over the place, along with an all-star cast. The recently deceased, R.I.P., Isaiah Whitlock Jr., and also recently deceased Julian McMahon, who was so great to see him last year in this comeback, not only on this popular show, but also in the recent Nicolas Cage movie, The Surfer. So really just great to see him back after having battled cancer and unfortunately succumbing to it in the end this very year. So even though the fact that, and by the way, there's another death associated to the show, but I don't want to be more of a downer on all the unfortunate deaths connected to The Residence, because it is such a joyful and funny and pleasant murder mystery show. And the star is this detective called Cordelia Cup, played by Uzo Aduba from Orange is the New Black, playing very much a monk-like character, the TV show Monk, where she's probably somewhere on the spectrum and she has her own way of processing these crimes that are occurring. And she's always a step ahead, but because of her odd way of communicating, seems to be not know what she's doing, although she has this reputation of always solving these crimes. So it is like a Benoit Blanc type mystery. It is like a Monk-like character, and obviously could have been a show that went season to season. And as far as I could tell from Netflix's own self-reported numbers, this was a very popular show. It got Emmy nominations and yet was not renewed for a second season. But there's no cliffhanger on this. It is a self-contained mystery. So if you've been putting off watching it, do watch it. If you've just watched Knives Out, the most recent one on Netflix, this is a nice pairing for sure. Okay, one more recommendation. If you are a true crime fan, and if you have Peacock, a very small sliver of you out there, I believe, there is The Devil in Disguise, which is a miniseries about the murders committed by John Gacy. This stars Michael Chernus, who plays Rick and Hale on the Severance TV series. And you would think that should make sense for a Wayne Gacy series, or that he might be too comedic. He's not. The kind of buffoonish energy he brings to Severance is very intentionally deployed here, because this show, and this is why I recommend it, is very true to the original investigation of the failed investigation of what was obviously occurring. That this man was not only murdering these boys, but murdering boys where he was obviously the last known contact with them. They sometimes lived with him. They all worked for him in this construction company. He obviously was luring boys to this horrible fate, dozens of them. And this was happening right under everybody's noses. Everybody knew it was happening, and it was complete neglect, just basically mishandling of this investigation that allowed this thing to go on for so long. And it's a debunking of this mythology of like these serial killers, they're just so smart, when it's just happenstance and bad investigation. And oftentimes, specifically here, this not wanting to see these people who maybe are marginal in our society, and how these predators prey on those people. So a very intelligent exploration of it, very moving sometimes, because the episodes center around the victims, not around the perpetrator. Although, for anybody who thinks that if you watch the first couple of episodes, we're not really going to get into the nitty-gritty of some of the ugly details of the crimes with Gacy, you do eventually get that, but only in the context, eventually, of these actual boys with all the possibility, and they're not all boys, young men as well, but just these lost lives and the tragedy of that, so that when the grislier details come, it really has more of an emotional punch than you normally see in these shows, where they really go for the glorification of the serial killer. This is very much not that, but yet I think really valuable and very intelligent. And from what I could tell, the audiences really approve of this series. I just think it kind of went between the cracks because it came out right before Halloween. Not really Halloween viewing. It was on Peacock. So any of you out there who are true crime fans, I do recommend this. In general, I'm not a huge fan of this, but I did think this was a very intelligent way of dealing with this material. Dying for Sex, based on the popular podcast, Michelle Williams, Jenny Slate, incredibly hilarious Jenny Slate, a very funny and horny and strange way, never seen this before, this way of addressing this tragedy that happens every single day of women who are dying of undiagnosed cancer. But this show is surprising in so many ways. I almost quit on it early on, but stuck with it, and it really nails the landing in the end. As I mentioned, it is so emotional and yet uplifting in a way that you can still live a life, even when it has a very limited, and where your clock is ticking. You literally know your clock is ticking, and still making the most of the time you have left, even if it's just to explore your sexuality for a few more months before it all goes away. And I think that this was definitely not seen enough. And of course, Michelle Williams as the person who's dying of cancer, very giving another incredible performance. She's always so great. But really the MVP here, Jenny Slate, absolutely hilarious as her best friend. Okay, and 2 documentaries. I don't know if this counts as TV. I've seen it both on best of movie lists and on TV. They did play in theaters at film festivals, but then basically was considered television. One is Mr. Scorsese on Apple TV, this omnibus view of his entire career, literally from birth to his most recent projects, 5 hours long, an incredible binge. Darren and I both discussed it here on a podcast. We just binged through it. If you are even mildly a fan of any of Scorsese's films, you will find this movie or series, whatever you want to call it, utterly fascinating. And we binged it. Like I binged almost the entire show in one go round. And I think Darren did it in 2 days. And even at 5 hours, only scratches the surface, but still incredibly well researched. And when you consider the amount of talking heads here, so many famous people talking about Scorsese, I have to assume that there's so many of them that they only get to speak for 5 or 10 minutes oftentimes across the entire series. And if there are unedited conversations with those people that are 1 hour long each, I'm like, Apple already has, I know they publish podcasts now of all their TV shows. They should just make this into a series and just publish all the raw conversations. I would listen to all of it. And one more documentary on HBO Max is Pee-wee as himself. This is like a 3-hour movie that played at a bunch of film festivals. Last year, I believe it was, made some best of lists. I think it's on some best of list movie lists this year. Split into 2 episodes, so I guess now it's television. Regardless, I watched this in one go-round. I thought I was going to watch it in 2 sittings. It's 3 hours long. I watched the whole thing all the way through. I'm not a huge Pee Wee Herman fan, but I appreciate him. But I do recommend this if you grew up in that era or just interested in that era of time. It's so many fascinating aspects to it. The fact that he hid his personal life for his whole entire career, that he was in a time where, especially as a child's entertainer, he was really paranoid about revealing that aspect of himself, seeing how he was so out of the closet when he was young and then went so into the closet, something that he says about himself. They do interview him extensively for this show, even though he passed away before it was released. So his own personal journey is fascinating, what it says about Hollywood and the way he lived within Hollywood, but also just to see how he hustled, how he invented this character. No one cared about it. He started to put on these shows that he paid for himself in Los Angeles, how they became incredibly popular. They recorded one of these shows, the Pee-wee Playhouse format, ran it on HBO at midnight. It became, I think it was HBO actually, and it became hugely successful. And then he was on MTV, and then the movie came along. And basically, how across his entire career, it was always people telling him no, and him just forcing his own success. And then he becomes incredibly successful, and how that in a lot of ways ruined his personal life. It's an incredible journey of someone, that the tenacity of having an idea and forcing it into the light, and then the really incredible repercussions of his career after that as well. So highly recommended, even if you're not a Pee-wee fan, by the way. But of course, if you are a fan of Pee-wee, you're going to find this really interesting documentary, and that's on HBO. Okay. Those are the honorable mentions, everybody. Now let's get into the final list. All right, at number 15, I'm going to cheat even with my very first. I'm not even in the top 10. First of all, I made it longer than the top 10. This is my first cheat. Second of all, I'm going to call out one comedy, but mention another one because I could have slotted it in here just as easily. So the one I'm going to put officially on the list is Deli Boys. I've talked about this with Sona on the podcast before, also one of her favorite comedies of the year. One of the main reasons I want to recommend it is because it's definitely coming back for a season 2. There's been so many multiple shows this season, at least 3 that I can think of, but more than that actually, that had to do with drug dealing in this interesting netherworld of Philadelphia. So how you have this famous old city, its inner city, all the different people who cohabitate in Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, a true melting pot, but a comedy that has to do with these Pakistani brothers who inherit the convenience store from their dad, who unexpectedly passes away, only to discover that the convenience store, this chain of convenience stores, is purely there as money laundering for a much bigger drug business, and how members of the family already knew about this. And this show can get very dark. There are body disposals and such that happen, as you would expect of this genre of show, but always so funny, like very, very funny exploration of these loser sons, failed sons, who the dad never trusted with the business details, and basically not because he wanted to hide the criminal ongoing, which of course he did, but also just felt like they were not the right type of people to run this business, or had the business acumen, and how they have to kind of like rise up or not because they are kind of losers, but a blast, such a fun show to watch. So that's Deli Boys coming back for another season. This is on FX or Disney and FX. I'm sorry, Disney FX through Hulu. It's whatever. It's on FX on TV. It's on Hulu, which is also available through Disney. And like I said, cheating here. I could have just as easily put The Chair Company here. Darren and I, of course, just discussed this recently. The absolutely bonkers Tim Robinson series, which becomes, he's more known for his sketch work, loosely allows sketches to fit together into an overall story, which is a crazy conspiracy theory about maybe badly manufactured chairs, but maybe about vampires as well. The season finale of the show is absolutely crazy. And part of the reason I didn't put it higher on my list is because I really don't know if this thing is sustainable. It's coming back for a second season. But what I do know is that it's just really funny and just really strange. And there's nothing else like it on TV. So if you like Robinson's comedy at all, give this a try. Even if you have no idea what the hell's going on most of the time, you'll laugh a lot. Okay, number 14. No cheats here, just one title. This is another show that I think like really people just don't appreciate it enough because it's just come around for 3 seasons now, and it's The White Lotus. I've already said most of this on my conversation with Darren, so do check out that episode. But long story short, look, just because this thing is consistently great every time it comes back, it is sometimes uneven. It does go for the shock value, in my opinion, a little too much. But at its best, I mean, when do you have this level of writing and you have one creator writing all this and directing all this, and it looks incredible, and the people look incredible, and the locations look incredible, and in the conversation, it's one of those shows that generates buzz as the season goes on. It got a lot of Emmy nominations, so good for that. But I do feel like that among the critics, this is not on any top 10 lists. And everybody's just like, yeah, it's another great show with uniformly fantastic performances in another beautiful locale, but actually explores death, some very dark themes, but in this incredibly entertaining packaging. We cannot just say, yeah, it's great again, eye roll. Come on. Come on, people. This was one of the best shows of the year. And again, this is my personal opinion, of course. So the experience of actually talking about this week to week with Sona is the type of show you want to talk about from week to week. And there are plenty of shows that were a lot of fun and you could binge them and then forget about them 1 week later. Some of the shows I've outlined here were a lot of fun to watch, and I don't remember much about them. White Lotus was the type of show that you could watch in the moment. You could engage in the cultural conversation. There were a lot of memes about it. There were great performances. You could laugh at it, or you could be emotionally moved by it, like I was in the finale, or both. Hey, don't look a gift horse in the mouth, everybody. All right, another show that no one's talking about that deserved much more attention. There's a show, this one I would bet, is completely under the radar for so many people. It's the Pixar series on Disney called Win or Lose. Again, of course, my choices very much tie into my personal biography. My daughter, every single week, this show would come on. I think it was 2 episodes per week. She could not wait for each one of these to drop. But why? Because she's just entering middle school. She was stressed out about going to middle school. And this is a show about kids who are right around the same age, probably like over under 10, 12 years old. And what this show does in such an elegant way is a really beautiful thing. Each episode, it takes place at a softball game. And what you see in each episode is that there is a protagonist and there is someone who's their antagonist, whether it's the umpire making a call during the game, whether it is a bully in school, and some of these protagonists from episode to episode, even adults sometimes. And what the show does so generously is that it sets up a very simple story of how our particular protagonist is trying to get out of some really difficult situation, and there's just this thing in their way. And then the next episode, eventually all these stories resolve, by the way. But then in the next episode, our protagonist was the antagonist of the previous episode. And then you see that they have their own issues that they're going through and their own circumstances, that the reason they're behaving the way they are, sometimes irrationally, sometimes they are being bullies, but there is some complexity in their own lives that they're working through. And then at the end of that episode, it's a bit of a cliffhanger, but then of course, the next episode is about their hurdle, whoever is there blocking their way from what they want to do, and how that person has a more complex backstory as well. And it goes from episode to episode like this. And the stakes sometimes are very personal. It's like maybe the antagonist particularly is a mother who's not allowing the daughter to do something, only for us to discover that the mother has her own hurdles that she's dealing with, her own complexities in her life, that of course she's not sharing with her daughter because they're trying to put up a strong front that they're doing fine when they're really not. And these stories go and go. And it's very funny. It's very entertainingly animated. It sometimes becomes downright surreal in its imagery. It's pretty beautifully designed. And this is a really good thing to watch with your kids if they're in that age group. So if your kids engage with this, if they're around 9, 10, 12, do check it out. Watch it with them. And I think you can watch it even if you're not, don't have kids. But I think it's very valuable if you do have kids and you want something to watch with them. And that's called Win or Lose. It's on Disney+. Okay, my number 12. We're almost in the top 10. Another Netflix series. Very short. I love how short this is. It is Death by Lightning, and this features Michael Shannon playing James Garfield and Matthew McFadden playing Charles Guiteau. If you don't know how these two characters intersect in their lives, I mean, history, of course, spoils the show, but if you don't know, don't read too much about it. If you do know, if you've read the book that it's based on, it's a very entertaining adaptation. And by the way, 4 episodes, beautifully produced, looks, totally realistic to its time period. And so rare that I would say that this 4 episodes should have been longer. The very rare Netflix show that should have been longer. But each one of the chapters outlined in these 4 episodes, utterly fascinating. Someone like James Garfield and how they rose from a nobody to become the presidential candidate for the Republican Party. If you've seen Conclave, Conclave basically borrows exactly what happened historically true during the Republican convention of this period of time, where Garfield goes from having 1 vote that over the course of the convention, getting more and more votes until he becomes the candidate. Minor spoilers for that episode. Once again, he did become president, so I don't know if I'm spoiling anything for you there. And then in parallel, this handshake at the final moments of episode 1, in which Guiteau shakes Garfield's hand, understanding Guiteau, this wanderer, like another kind of stereotypical or prototypical type of American man who, as the country was forming itself, found himself involved with different schemes and joining cults and just trying to find his way as a non-conforming person in this very strict definition of the type of man he should be. And then moving from one movement to the next, eventually hanging his hopes on this candidacy for James Garfield and his psychology as well. And he is such a type of outsider character that we've seen throughout American history as well. And these two very different men in this period of time, this early formation of the country, it says a lot of things about our current political climate. It also tells us a lot about how the country has changed so much, and then also how it has not changed so much. It's really smart. And like I said, there are just aspects of Garfield's later life. I, once again, don't want to spoil things for people who don't know that much about this not very famous president, that in and of themselves could be a whole series. Just the medical aspects of this story, which I'll leave at there. It's only 4 hours. If you are a history buff at all, you're definitely going to love this series. And as a matter of fact, you're going to want to listen to a bunch of podcasts, read this book that it's based on for additional context. And like I mentioned, this could have easily been 7 or 8 episodes, and I would have been happy to watch it. But at 4 episodes, anyone can watch this very quickly, and it's terrific, fantastic. And great performances across the board, like an all-star cast. And that's Death by Lightning on Netflix. Okay, at number 11, here's something I knew nothing about, speaking of historical context. And definitely no one has seen this show. It's The Narrow Path to the Deep North. This is based on the novel by Australian author Richard Flanagan. And it's about the construction of the Burma Railway in North Africa during World War II. Again, I don't have any of this context. To be honest with you, knew very little about this historic time and the Australian history of it. But it tells the story in two time frames. In the past, we see this Dr. Dorigo Evans, played by Jacob Elordi, who's become really like a go-to character actor, or just an actor in general. For me, a real standout in the Frankenstein movie for me as well this year. And in the future, in the 80s, we have him played by Ciarán Hinds, reflecting on this period of his youth, in which not only he ends up being a prisoner of war, but also in the summer when he was finishing his doctorate studies, had an affair with his uncle's wife, I believe is his uncle. And the story moves back and forward in time from the older perspective, now in the 80s, now way past this horrible time he had in his youth. But then it's as if these memories are happening within other memories. Is he reflecting in the 80s on this affair he had, or is he in the prison camp thinking about it, or are all these time frames or mental state of minds all happening at the same time? It is this kind of fractured storytelling, which maybe irritated some people, maybe feels a little too dense. But for me, it was really powerful. And maybe the most powerful aspect of it was, and we've seen this in other movies before as well, but seeing all these men in this prisoner of war camp and how they have a real camaraderie. There is joy, or at least some aspect of living that he only experiences there. And that's kind of fascinating, that the thing he misses later in life was not, of course, the horror of people dying and being tortured in these camps, but not that aspect of it, but this real sense of these men in sharing this horrible experience and this brotherhood that formed between them. And it's really just a beautifully made film. I call it a film. It's all shot, I should say it's all directed by Justin Kurzel, the Australian director, who also directed The Order this year with Jude Law, which is now available on Hulu as well, by the way. So another recommendation of something from last year, actually, but very good that Darren and I both watched here on the show, podcast as well. But it really does feel like a movie. It's all of a piece. You can binge all. There's only 5 episodes. This is dense, though. You probably don't want to watch it all at once. There are scenes here. There are episodes here that are very hard to watch, brutal to watch, but still very powerful and fantastic performances, especially from Jacob Elordi. And I, in general, I think as I've gotten older, find these movies and TV series that have this bittersweet reflection on these earlier time periods in our lives to be something that I find really interesting to explore. And that's available on Amazon Prime, The Narrow Path to the Deep North. And nobody's watched this. Okay, we're finally made to the top 10. All right, at number 10, common side effects. So one of my favorite shows of last year was Scavenger's Reign on HBO Max. This truly fascinating and beautiful anime series from HBO Max, which got canceled, unfortunately, about these survivors of a ship crash and how they need to live on this planet that is a pure scavenger planet, will kill you unless you learn to somehow integrate yourself with it. And it explores these themes of our relationship with nature and how humans always try to live outside of nature, through a truly psychedelic, crazy, oftentimes maybe off-putting to some viewers, but I just found it absolutely some of the best science fiction I've seen. It's available on Netflix now. If anyone missed it on HBO, it's available on both platforms. But the same creators of that show have a show that has succeeded. It is coming back for season 2, everybody. It's called Common Side Effects, in a completely different visual style, much more cartoonish. Actually has Mike Judge from Beavis and Butthead is actually one of the voices and one of the creators of the show. Maybe that's why some of this stylistically, it looks so different than what these creators have done before. Very funny oftentimes, but creepy sometimes as well. Exploration of a mushroom that gets discovered, and this mushroom can cure anything. I mean, anything. Maybe even cure death. And the idea that this thing wants to be co-opted by these pharmaceutical companies that do not want a cure of all diseases to be made available. And you'd think like, well, that's, even though that's fascinating in and of itself, that this could be a, pretty straightforward pharmaceutical, big pharma is bad story. And definitely that is the story we see play out here as this person is trying to A, stay alive from these dark forces that are trying to kill him, and B, keep this out of the hands of this pharmaceutical company. But how all these complicated loyalties between different people who want this thing and want it for different reasons. And this schlubby hippie dude who discovered this mushroom, who's caught in the middle of all this, who's mostly our POV character. But it's more complex than that. Once again, Darren and I have touched on this briefly on the podcast, but truly fascinating that there is a terrorist group who wants to make this available to everybody, and how there are risks of that as well. If no one can die anymore, then what's the value of life, and what are the complexities there? And not only that, of course, on top of all this, maybe this mushroom, maybe this psychedelic experience that's given to these people as they're being cured, maybe there's something else going on there, an intelligence behind all of this. So there's mysteries here, there's comedy here. It's very cartoonish in its execution, but still some great action set pieces that are executed in this style. Really interesting ideas of how you wield power or discovery or any kind of new technology, because we could just make a technological metaphor. Of course, this is a technology, and then the pluses and minuses basically, and then who becomes the gatekeeper of a true breakthrough technology. And it's a great show. It's so intelligent if you like science fiction, and it is available to view right now, and it's coming back for season 2. And here's where I'm cheating again. I want to throw out 2 other shows here that if you like adult animation for science fiction, etc., 2 other things I want to recommend very quickly. One is hugely popular, which is Invincible, and it's on Amazon Prime, and it's coming back for its final season this year. So if you're behind on it, catch up on it. Seth Rogen is all over this list, believe it or not. He's also a producer of this show. It's kind of spun its wheels a little bit in season 2 and part of season 3, but very interested in seeing how they wrap up the story here. I think this is a much better exploration of what would be the actual consequences of a superpowered person like a Superman versus The Boys, for example, which is also coming back for its final season this year, and also from Seth Rogen. But Invincible, I think, is the actual, even though it's a cartoon, is actually the more mature exploration of the topic. And not a show, this is actually a show from 2023, believe it or not, but just finally was released in 2025, it's season 2 of Pantheon, which was an AMC TV series that when AMC's studio went out of business, this show was complete, but then never was released. And then it was released only in Australia. And this was like 2 years ago or something. And then it ended up on YouTube for free. And then, believe it or not, even though it's on YouTube for free, I never finished watching it. I watched like 1 or 2 episodes out there. But now finally, this very year, season 1 and season 2 of Pantheon are now on Netflix. So I'm going to call it a 2025 release. And this is about the risks, another very intelligent exploration of the risks of artificial intelligence. Although in this particular version of artificial intelligence, they are taking human beings and uploading their brains, graphically, horribly, physically uploading their brains into a computer to create these AI agents that they can make as many copies of as they want. The smartest people in the world live in this virtual world. But then some of these people, intelligent as they are, discover that they're inside of a virtual world, and then they break out of those constraints, and then how quickly they evolve, and they're this really beautiful relationship between this one particular scientist and his daughter, and how he's trying to maintain this relationship with his daughter, but is so rapidly evolving past her. So it's a really fascinating exploration of these topics of AI, one of the most mature explorations of it, and a really satisfying season 2, which you have to see the finale to believe it. It's just an incredible way they resolve this story. And that's Pantheon on Netflix, by the way. But primarily, once again, want to shout out a new show, Common Side Effects, on HBO Max, coming back for season 2 this year, and season 1 currently available. All right, at number 9, another little cheat here. The studio, Darren and I have talked about the show in great detail. What a blast. Such a smart, incredibly well-made series. Seth Rogen again. And my cheat, of course, is to bring in Platonic. Not as great with season 2 as it was for season 1. Loved season 1 so deeply, but still a lot of fun. And Rose Byrne, incredible. She'll be shouted out for something else later in this week when I have my another end of year list. So the studio, and Darren and I discussed this in more detail in his end of year list, by the way, and Platonic, both available on Apple TV, both coming back for another season. All right, number 8, bumped all the way down to number 8 is Pluribus. What a great pleasure to see Rhea Seehorn. What a great pleasure to see Vince Gilligan again. Of course, we've just talked about the show ad nauseum for, a 2-hour episode just recently as well. And I have a conversation with the new contributor, Alan, where we dig into some of the theorizing about the future of the show. So expect to see that as well. What a pleasure to have a show like this to talk about. For me, I have to bump it a little bit down my list because I had a hard and fast rule earlier this year that a show that ends on a cliffhanger gets dinged for me. And if I have to do it for Alien Earth, very disappointed in Alien Earth, by the way, I have to do it for Pluribus as well. This is not as unsatisfying as Alien Earth as far as the finale goes. And also, overall, the season was stronger than Alien Earth for sure. But still, I had to bump it down lower than I expected on this list because I found it a little bit of an incomplete in the finale, I have to say. I know other people disagree on that front. Number 7, The Lowdown. So this is Sterling Harjo's follow-up to Reservation Dogs, based on a friend of his who unfortunately took his life a few years ago, who explored the strange political bedfellows of Tulsa, Oklahoma, a city that has a very complex history. We just rewatched the Watchmen adaptation from HBO recently, of course, also dealing with some of these same themes. So the tone of the show, such a hangout, despite stakes being so high. Sterling Harjo loves to just have this imagery along with incredible needle drops, hilarious dialogue that seems to be coming right out of these characters' mouths as if they were improvising in the moment. And of course, number one thing recommending this is an absolute career best possible performance, possibly career best performance from Ethan Hawke, who, by the way, also gives an incredible performance in Blue Moon, totally transforming himself in the Blue Moon movie that came out recently, which again, I'll be talking in some greater detail in a follow-up episode. But he is just crushing it, like basically at the peak of his career this late in the going. I do hope The Lowdown comes back for a second season. I'm not sure it will, but we do have season 1 and this really entertaining, Big Lebowski-ish noir comedy that also deals with some complex historical aspects of Tulsa's history, but in a very entertaining way. And once again, featuring this incredible performance and a great central relationship between the Ethan Hawke character and his daughter. Just aces across the board. What a great show. And believe it or not, that, as great as all that I just said was, it's at number 7 on my list. Number 6, The Rehearsal. Again, I'm not going to say much more about this. Darren and I talked about it. But if you are not a fan of Nathan Fielder, I'm not sure this is going to win you over. But this show is absolutely remarkable. The the trick it pulls off, the magic trick it pulls off in its final episode. I can't spoil it for you. You just have to see it. It's absolutely insane what he does to make this season of television occur. And if you did see season 1 and you thought that was pretty elaborate in its execution, this is, honestly, one of the most incredible things you'll ever see on TV. Someone committing to the bit this hard. Unheard of. Number 5. Here's my top 5. The Task. Okay, so Task, this is another show that I feel is really not on a lot of top 10 lists. And again, speaking to the fact that this is very much my personal opinion of the show, if I had just binged Task, I don't know if I would rank it this highly. But talking to Sona week to week about this show, and my wife as well, we watch this week to week, just having that experience of having something to talk about, something you could dig into, these characters, which, again, the proximity I have to this area geographically of the country matters as well. All of this really paid off for me. It's coming back for another season as well. which is always a plus. This really worked for me, and I love the family dynamics. I thought the balance of the crime story and the family dynamics was really strong. And there are similar shows this year that didn't work for me at all. This one, I think, got all those ingredients just right, and just the emotion of it at the end really just knocked my socks off. So a big fan of Task. It's my number 5. It's on HBO. Of course, we covered it in full here on the podcast. Do check our backlog of episodes. Number 4, again, a show that maybe wouldn't rank this high, but this is a personal list. It's Severance. Here's a show, season 2 of Severance, that did not get as much love as I think it deserved. But I thought a remarkable season of TV. A couple of rough spots here and there. Very little, maybe half an episode here that I would have cut out. But in general, really satisfied with the season of TV. Really satisfied with the way the mystery developed. And I love the, I don't want to spoil things. Of course, we covered it here week to week. But I love where the show lands, where there is this sense, the creator of the show has specifically mentioned how season 1 is about childhood and season 2 is very much about adolescence. And the idea that, when you're an adolescent, you might make irrational decisions in the end. And I loved the final moments of the show. It is this thing is never going to work out, but we're just going to make this choice anyway. And I loved it. I cannot wait for season 3. I hope it doesn't take 3 years to come around. I thought this was one of my highlights of the year. Not only, of course, this is a personal list, not only the show in and of itself, but covering it here on the podcast. Speaking of Adolescence, my number 3 is Adolescence, another show. Darren and I discussed it as well. My wife and I discussed it when she finally caught up with it. I did watch the whole thing again. It's only 4 episodes with my wife. And again, a total knockout second time around. And as Darren discussed when we discussed it earlier this week, if you have kids in a certain age group, it is a profound experience to have watched this with them and have maybe shocking conversations with them after the fact. So highly recommended. Do check out Adolescence. Incredible performances across the board. A bravura, technically, to be shooting each one of these episodes, one continuous take for each one of these 4 episodes, but also maybe a very important thing to watch as well in our current cultural climate. Number 2, again, discussed in some great detail with Darren. His number 1, spoiler if you haven't seen that episode, Andor. What an incredible gift we have. This would probably rank even higher if I had not binged 3 episodes per week to be able to talk about it here on a podcast, but also just because I wanted to know what's going to happen next. Actually, probably something that should have been digested a little more slowly. One of the smartest explorations of either whether it's a spy series and you love spy series, whether you love Star Wars lore, or whether you are fascinated with science fiction, being able to be a prism through which you can see an alternate exploration of themes of control, of the limitations of rebellion, the limitations of control, of governance, seeing just something fascinating of seeing that, inside of the empire, for example, this evil empire, are a bunch of worker drones that just want to collect their check and get in their pension and just want law and order. And they don't see themselves as villains. They're just in a different system than you are in. And this very dense exploration of all the different sides of this universe, so intelligently explored in the context of this series Andor. Season 1 and season 2, I've only seen them once. Honestly, because it's intimidating how dense they are. And I probably should just watch it for the pleasure of the world building, as well as for some of these, digging into some of these themes. We'll probably never get a show this elaborately produced. I think it was $700 million for these 2 seasons of shows. It is one of the most unpopular of the Star Wars series on Disney+, probably because it has less appeal to the younger audiences that tune in for anything that has Star Wars on it. But it is so good. If you haven't watched this, you definitely should watch it. If you're not a Star Wars fan, but you like spy stories, watch this anyway. It's so great. And at least we'll have this forever. And it's on Disney+, easily available, and Hulu, I think, as well. Okay, this all leads to my number 1, which I'll be discussing in much greater detail with my co-host in this particular episode, my wife, who is joining for the first time, Kim. The Pitt, because she works in medicine and she has dealt with traumas in the field, as it were, or at work anyway. And for all the reasons that I will outline in my conversation with my wife, I recommend this show. And of course, it's available on HBO Max. It's coming back next week. If you are going to go week to week with us, do check in. We'll be covering it throughout its run, and also currently available on TBS if you're in the United States. So let me bring in my wife to that conversation, and we'll talk about my number one pick for the year, The Pitt. All right, Kim, so this is your first time on the show. Tell me, how did you find out about our podcast?
How did I find out about your podcast? Well, I have been married to you for about 10 and a half years.
More than that.
11 years? It feels like Victor's lifetime is what he's trying to get at. So I've been present peripherally since the beginning of Need Some Introduction. I have heard it through the walls being recorded, but I have not yet been a guest. So thanks for having me.
I thought you were going to say, but I have not listened to the podcast.
I try not to listen to the podcast because we already have discussed some of these things in the kitchen.
You get the live version of the podcast.
No, I do actually listen specifically to the first 15 to 20 minutes of the show so I can hear your banter between you and Darren and you and Sona. And I do occasionally listen if I have seen the show, but there are a lot of shows that you watch that I haven't seen because, as you know, I am not the TV watcher in the family.
So the reason I had you come on, by the way, is because, of course, season 2 of The Pitt is coming on. I just, in this very episode, ran down my favorite shows of the year, and The Pitt season 2 starting next week. And you caught up on Pitt season 1, and hopefully we'll be touching base on season 2 throughout its run, which is like a 4-month run. It's a long series, like old school TV, which is one of the main reasons that I liked this season of the show, something that's missing. And I had a couple other shows here on my list that I wanted to run by you. I wanted to start with, because your mom was around, of course, for the holidays. We ended up rewatching Your Friends and Neighbors because we watched the finale of Pluribus, and she watched it with us, completely confounded, by the way. She could not understand what was going on in that show. Understandably, if you're late to the game, that's a problem. But after that ended, it suggested Your Friends and Neighbors. And I was like, hey, you should watch this. You'll like this. And indeed she did. She binged the entire show in a day. And therefore, I rewatched about half that show, maybe more. And you probably watched it as well. It is on my long list of things for this season. So I wanted to ask you about some of those shows that I know you've watched, starting with, what did you think of Your Friends and Neighbors the first time around and maybe on the rewatch?
I enjoyed Your Friends and Neighbors both times. It's not something that I would have considered rewatching, but since my mom got into it, I did sit down and rewatch the majority of it, and it still was just as entertaining as it was the first time around. Yeah,
I actually enjoyed it maybe a little bit more because watching it week to week, you analyze it a little bit more. Season 2 is right around the corner, just a few months out. I'm looking forward to it. This was a fun rewatch, honestly. Another thing I made you watch, and this...
I like the preface to this. I made you watch this
I made you watch this, but you got sucked into it. And a lot of people quit on this show very early on, and I did struggle with it early on, but I think it really paid off, is the show Dying for Sex.
Yes. Michelle Williams was great in that show. It was very explicit in its content, obviously, with the title. But yeah, it was a well-done show.
Jenny Slate's hilarious in that show. She released a lot of kudos. Yeah, and I would say anybody who kind of quit on that early on, stick with it, because I think there's a real emotional payoff. We have in our family, in our friend circle, multiple people who've been dealing with breast cancer. And I guess if it really cuts close to home, it might be a difficult thing to watch. So it's hard to recommend it if that's what you're dealing with, but maybe those are the people who will appreciate it, because our particular friends who've dealt with this, maybe they want a more brazen exploration of the topic, so maybe it's something to recommend. I can't speak from personal experience, but what do you think?
Yes, I mean, we do have multiple friends who have had or have cancer, and one of whom is now 5 years out, and she watched the show and she really liked it. I cried my eyes out at the end of that show, which I don't think you did, but I got very emotional at the end.
Yeah, I did not. I mean, sometimes I'll cry occasionally in a show or in real life, but the that one didn't make me cry, but I did get a lot of feels at the end. I think, and it's one of the main reasons I recommended it to you was that it was such an affirming perspective. It was actually, that's part of the reason I didn't feel like crying, was because I felt like the show, it's not a depressing way that she comes to cope with her death. It's kind of basically she accepts it as part of life and part of this journey she's on. And I thought that was like a really great way to see something that is inevitable for her, obviously, but for all of us in the end.
Yeah, she has a good perspective on the kind of end of her life, but still I find anyone dying to be tragic.
Yes, that would be. And then some other shows that we watched. I know we watched another thing that made you cry for sure, which was Adolescence, which was...
Turns out I cry a lot.
Yeah, the ones I'm recommending here made her cry for sure.
That's how he keeps me engaged in a show. He's like, let me find the most traumatic thing. Either people will be murdered in the first scene or die throughout the show, or some major tragic event is happening. And that is what keeps me from falling asleep.
And speaking to that, some listeners have actually asked, how do you pick the shows you pursue on? Part of it is just like whatever my interest is, but I've kind of explained this formula where it has to be something I think will be interesting to discuss, but also has some level of prestige, something you can dig into. It's not just plot. But one of those, I think the most popular shows we have are the ones that make you cry. So to that point, high on my list, and I think underappreciated by a lot of year-end lists, was Task, which has everything you described. She's going to fall asleep if there's not somebody's life at risk pretty early in the going.
That's how I live my life, at work and at home.
This is why she has the job she has. And at home too, I have to always manufacture I'll set the house on fire to keep her awake.
I meant TV watching at home, not actual real life drama, Victor.
And of course, and that one makes you cry at the end. So you get a little drama at the beginning, a little heist at the beginning, and a little drama at the end, which is the reason I like the show so much. Okay, but of course, my number one for the year was The Pitt. And to a large extent, the reason I liked it so much was because it was such a throwback to old school TV after this whole prestige era of television shows that are like very high stakes, very high concept, usually have a huge arc for a season. Old school TV is something I didn't appreciate until recently because it's so rare nowadays. But I really like Poker Face, for example, as well, where it's really, you could just watch an individual episode. The character development happens, but it happens very slowly over the entire season. Anybody can dip in at any time. We've actually watched this show at different times, with your mom, with your dad and stepmom as well. And they can just literally dip in for one episode and they have all the context they need in one single sitting, which again, very old school formula, but I really appreciated that. But of course, I want to talk to you about it because you've worked in trauma, you're a PA now, and you deal with patients that have a lot of these issues. I love, by the way, watching this next to you when we just binged the end of the season again during the holidays. And you're literally, as they're shouting out the oxygen levels and stuff like that, you're actually making the diagnosis that they're going to announce. So she's spoiling every diagnosis in the moment, which speaks to the verisimilitude of the actual diagnosis and what we're seeing on screen. Obviously, there's things that are accurate, like the diagnoses, but tell me what's not very accurate about this show.
I did have a hard time getting into The Pit, as I mentioned to you at one point, because it was too much like being at work. But then when you suggested I come on the podcast to discuss it, I then committed and I sat down and I got through like the last 9 episodes in a very short period of time. I think there's so many things that are accurate. It's obviously dramatized for TV, but as you said, they're calling out the signs and symptoms and yelling things out in the middle of the ER. I was making the diagnosis, so good job for me.
Is that part of the pleasure of watching the show, is getting the diagnosis right?
Yes, it's part of the pleasure of working in the medical field. So in terms of what is most accurate, they pick real life diagnoses and problems, and their treatment algorithm is pretty accurate. Not everything is 100%, but for the most part, it is what you would see in real life if you have someone with those problems. There's a few medical issues on the show that, you read about in textbooks. They give you the textbook treatment algorithm in the show, but some of that stuff I haven't seen in real life. And I'm 20 years into my PA career, 6 of which were in the ER at a level 1 trauma center. But I appreciated the accuracy of the medical diagnosis.
A couple of questions I have as I'm watching it that I feels inaccurate to me, but maybe is not. So there, at one point, when chaos really hits the ER, given this mass casualty event that's occurring, they basically leverage one of the doctors on the show who is very prominent at the end, and also just at the very beginning of the episode, he's like the shift lead for the other shift and has a long relationship with Dr. Ravi. But he starts to triage everything like wartime triage because he has this experience. Apparently we figure out, once again, just have to infer this, that he's been in combat and he's talking to everybody like he is talking to his medics in combat. So when they're like improvising these medical procedures like on the fly, is that something that you would expect to see? That of course is an extreme, you're literally out of equipment, but is that something that you've seen in the past?
I definitely have not seen that. I worked through COVID and we were improvising things here and there, trying to figure out what the best way to manage patients was. But in this mass casualty event that they have on the Pitt, they're doing things that in theory make sense. Like they run out of chest tubes, they're putting Foley catheters, which normally go in your bladder, into the chest. They run out of their laryngoscopes, their lights stop working, so they're blindly intubating patients and doing chest compressions to see if there's a gurgling coming up from the esophagus so they can decide where to put the tube based on where the air bubbles are coming out. That makes sense in theory, but of course I've never seen anything quite like that because I've never experienced a casualty event that is that catastrophic where you run out of blood, you run out of all your basic supplies, and you just have to go off the fly. What's funny about it is there's anesthesiologists in the ER during the casualty event and surgeons. They're the ones that are the most incapacitated by not having supplies because you're so used to all this medical technology that the medical students and the interns are like, how about we do this? And they're like, are you crazy? And then they do it because they have no other option, which is not something that would probably ever happen in real life. Medical students on this show have a little too much freedom.
Well, given the circumstances, I think that's all but a caveat there. But that's a thing that I thought about that was interesting. That the show seems to go out of its way to make this point. If you are a surgeon for 20 years specializing, and you're like, I do this when the CT scan says this or whatever, and then all of a sudden you're in a situation where you can't have any of that. So you have to rely just on what you learned in school and like YouTube, like literally they're like, I learned how to do this by watching YouTube videos. So it's like, that's your level of requirement given the fact that you've run out of the traditional ways of doing things. So I thought that was interesting and probably true. For me, it feels true because it's not like, obviously I don't work in the medical field, but I've seen that even working in technology where everybody's like, well, this is how we do this. And it's like, because that's how they've done it for the past 10 years. And every single time we have this problem, we just like throw capacity at it or something like that. And someone comes in and goes like, but what if you didn't do any of that and went this other way? And and you don't think about it because you're just stuck in your routine of how things work. So that I thought was interesting. The other thing I just remembered what I wanted to bring up to you, and I think given conversations I've had with you, this is probably very true of doctors in general, but this idea of what's being represented there, where this is like the worst day of their lives, potentially. But as things go on, to some degree or another, every single doctor there, and maybe it is just that they're so exhausted and they're all on adrenaline, but the fact that they are like seeing so many patients and saving so many lives, it's like a drug. They like start high-fiving each other, like we saved another one, and forgetting that all these people are dying and will probably be traumatized for the rest of their lives. I think the show's very smart at showing that happening over the course of the day.
Yeah, I think that is accurate because when you're in the middle of an emergency, you're just doing your job and you're not really thinking of the consequence to your emotional self. and to the family members and the patients that you're treating. And it's not till you stop and have a moment to reflect where you realize, oh my God, that was horrendous. I can't believe that happened. But when you're doing it in real time, there's too much to do. You have to just move on to the next thing so that you can get through your day. That's what's hard about working in that sort of setting, is like it hits you later.
Well, I mean, I think it's funny that one of the doctors who turns out to maybe have a drug problem, that he even says the reason I do this type of medicine versus other medicine is because he even shouts out everybody in the emergency room, saying that everybody there that he works with, they all have ADHD, and anything else that would be like, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this, and then your day's over, would be boring. What you need is chaos. So that is an interesting point that's being made, that we need these people to behave this way. That's how this thing operates. But in a way, it's a form of mental illness that, or an addiction maybe is the more accurate representation of it, that they have self-selected for this lifestyle because of the rush, right? And then sometimes maybe they lose sight of the consequences of the actions.
Yeah, I think that's 100% true. Like, I have always chosen jobs that are stressful, ER trauma, and now vascular surgery, where my life is still full of emergencies. And perhaps I have some degree of ADHD, but I just keep going back for more. So it is certainly a personality problem, and perhaps an adrenaline issue, perhaps addiction to some degree. But in the end, when you feel like you've accomplished something for the day and you've helped people, you've done your best work, that's what keeps people coming back and doing it some more. But there is a high burnout rate when it comes to dealing with this degree of acuity, especially in the ER. I worked at a busy ER in New Jersey for 6 years, and there was a group of people that like stuck it out with me in that time period. And over time, the majority of us moved on. It's hard to maintain that lifestyle.
And I think that people who stick it out for a really long time, like we see people here who in this show who have been doing it for decades, again, that becomes its own feedback loop, like a form of addiction, even if it's just something that they've like acclimated to, that could be problematic. This is part of the reason I like the show so much. It's not something that like shoves its themes in your face. Actually, I'll take that back. There are some themes that are definitely shoved in your face, like the way that hospitals are run and the profit motive. And maybe you could talk about some of that for sure. And I know this is another reason the show resonated with me, is I know that we've had conversations about how the healthcare system is so broken and the way these hospitals are run. And then you were like the Leonardo DiCaprio meme pointing at the TV screen. And you're like, yeah, guys, what that person said. So there's a lot of that shoved in your face. But the subtler stuff that I think is really smart in the show is what I was describing before, is this idea that what leads you to put yourself into this circumstance. And you could say, but I want to save lives. But we see specifically, especially late in that show, once most of the people have been rescued, they are then like potentially have ORs open, and they're like, I'm going to do this thing that I saw on YouTube to save this person's life. And they're like, we have an OR right now. And they're like, nope, I just did one 5 minutes ago. I'm going to do another one now. And it's like, okay, but we're out of the woods now. The operating rooms are open. You can send them upstairs. They can get a CT scan. They're like, I don't need a CT scan. I got this covered. And I think that it's showing that that is a problem with some of these people. I
mean, most medical professionals don't want to go rogue and do things that they've never done before because of the risk. I mean, there's a few crazy people in the world that would, but yeah, once your CAT scan is up and running, let's get a diagnosis and know what's going on before we do something that could potentially be harmful. Oh, in terms of your comment before about the state of medicine and the hospital administrators, one of the first comments I made to you in one of the beginning episodes of The Pitt was when the hospital administrator came down and was following Noah Wiley around because he's, the head physician in the ER. And she was trying to discuss Press-Ganey scores, which are patient satisfaction scores. And back when I worked in the ER, that was a huge deal. Pain was the fifth vital sign. So at one point they put a PA, physician assistant, in the triage area to immediately prescribe pain medication when patients came in so that patients didn't complain that their pain was not managed. Patient satisfaction was directly tied into the raises that the physicians got. So it's not always about what's best for the care of the patient, but if the patient perceives that they're not getting pain medication immediately, your raise is potentially affected. So having this woman following him around, like harassing him about various things, maybe they wouldn't do it in real time while you're trying to get through your ER shift, but there's always pressure from administration to just keep going and to make your satisfaction scores as high as they can and your hospital rankings as high as they can be. It's pretty accurate.
I mean, this is probably a much bigger conversation. Maybe leads us down a rabbit hole. But given what you just described there, I think it's pretty clear that part of that policy of treating everyone's pain all the time was part of what led to the opioid crisis in this country and around the world, honestly, but primarily here. I also wonder, how did this start? Like, who decided that pain is going to be one of the key metrics for...
I don't know exactly, but all patients who get discharged from the ER get a survey in the mail to fill out. And I would presume that there was complaints about not having adequate pain management. So when I first started, it was no big deal to send a patient with back pain or a fracture or something that was going to be followed up outpatient. You'd send them with a prescription for oxycodone. So I wrote oxycodone all the time. And then the culture changed over time, and we had access to a website where we could see within the tri-state area where patients had filled prescriptions. So you knew that, listen, they've already gotten 20 pills of Percocet from Dr. X. So you can go to them with this report and say, you already have pain medication prescribed. I'm not going to prescribe it for you. Or Adderall. That was another thing. Patients would come in and say they've run out of their Adderall, or they just need a few more pills. And then you'd log into this website and you can see what controlled substances were prescribed to give us a little bit more help in telling them no, because it was no big deal for a while there to prescribe willy-nilly.
This is another digression, but it's one of my hobby horses and I bring it up repeatedly on the podcast because it's something that I'm always fascinated by. One of my key failures, I think, in my opinion, of society, modern society, is the failures of systems. And I think that, again, we're just touching on it here, but I like that the show allows us to explore this a little bit. I think about it all the time because obviously you work in medicine and you complain about these things. Starting in the 80s, every process and every business was seen as something to make more efficient. With somebody with an MBA had a way to streamline your processes. And I think that this is another way of doing that, where they look at the success of a hospital and they're like, we need to get these scores up. And hey, if we give these people opioids and treat their pain, then they'll immediately give us a better score. So then it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy by creating a scorecard and now gaming this scorecard. And I think everybody who's listening to this podcast, even if you work in corporate America at all, have had exactly this experience of how they're like, well, your raise is based on this thing. And then the person who can game the system the best gets the biggest raise. And you're like, well, we're not making a better product. We're just gaming the system. And I think this is what happened here. And of course, to be able to give everybody opioids to make them all happy that they give you a better score inevitably creates a marketplace for someone to come in and say, hey, I have a non-addictive opioid. It's almost like the market keeps saying, give me this product. So someone says they have it, whether it exists or not. And then, of course, we have the circumstances that come out of that. But I think it's interesting that character on the show, who I don't think they make her a villain in the end. She actually, when the crisis hits, she gives them everything they need and she understands the importance of that. But in her day-to-day, she only cares about one thing and getting those scores up. And of course, she's right as well, because Ravi's like, you're just worried about these scores. And she's like, okay, I can keep doing things your way and we can close down the hospital. But that's not a solution either.
And you see that administrator at the end of the show, like after the mass casualty has settled down, and she's like, all right, let's reopen the doors, like fill up the waiting room again. And all the ER providers are very clearly burnt out and have never seen anything like that in their lives. And now they just have to keep going. The show keeps going. Multiple episodes after this mass casualty where they've now saved 100-something lives and seen the worst trauma that they've probably ever seen in their lives. And now they have to just keep on going because the hospital can't close. And when I worked in the ER, our ER would be over capacity and we wouldn't go on divert because the hospital administration doesn't want to turn an ambulance away. They need the business. That's what keeps the hospital going. Yeah. Meanwhile, you have nurses and doctors and PAs who are at the end of their rope, and there's physically nowhere to even put patients, but you have to manage it somehow.
That's a nightmare. So that's what's interesting to me. Like, I've never, once again, worked in a lot of corporate type settings where all this culture is represented. It's across the board and everything in the American economy. But this is, people's lives are literally at stake in this particular case. So when you have the doors open and you're bringing in more patients and you can't even treat them, it's like, well, that's going to be worse care for those people. But at the same time, what are they going to do? They need to pay their bills. So it is this really complicated catch-22 of the way this business works. Unlike other businesses where, I've worked on business intelligence type projects where people spend tens of millions of dollars and it never even goes live. And that's just, hey, we tried and, we failed and that's it. No big deal. We have this budget. We have to spend that on something. And I guess this is what makes medical shows compelling. You get it wrong, the person dies at the end.
Stakes.
High stakes for sure. So you took some notes on the show. Anything you wanted to bring up?
Oh, I just had a list of things that were a little bit exaggerated on the show. Overall, I thought the show was great. One, there's too much liberty given to interns and medical students. Also, Dr. Robbie, who's in charge of the ER, has to be involved in every single case, whereas in a real busy inner city ER, you'd have multiple attending physicians in different areas of the ER. And not every physician has to see every patient because there's like a pod of people in each area. But he's like the end-all be-all decision maker of the crew. And they always call him in. Not that you couldn't call in an extra help from someone at some point, but his job is to like oversee literally every patient that comes in that door. So that's a little much. One
thing that I was curious about that you had brought up, impressed by it actually, was how they had these boxes ready to go for some kind of mass casualty event. And, they have equipment for them to use. They have, they could plug it into their phone to do like a Doppler or something like that. Looking at it for me and for you, you thought it seemed realistic that some hospitals had this, but you mentioned specifically that like your hospital had nothing like this in case of...
I mean, we were never in a position to know if these protocols were in place. Those Dopplers exist. We don't happen to use them because we have different Dopplers. I've just never been in a position where we've had to pull out all the stops for something catastrophic. Also, being in New Jersey, there's so many hospitals in a small radius that if there is a mass casualty, they just send little groups of patients to all these hospitals because the caliber of hospitals here is like top tier. So you can spread out the patients so that not one hospital gets overwhelmed like it was in this show. Oh, a couple things that just came back to my mind. I also felt on the show that there was way too many family members involved in this.
And hanging out in the ER?
Yes. Yeah, there was way too many family members allowed to sit in the room with something catastrophic happen, a patient's coding, or they're getting a procedure, and the family is like hovering over the patient and over the team of people taking care of them. That wouldn't be allowed in real life.
It's interesting that they allow on the show anyway, if like a family member comes in and is like, oh, can I see him? They're sure, you can see them. Yeah. But the more realistic version of it is when there's that one cop and like every cop who has like any kind of EMT experience are like crowding around him. And the nurse is like, get the hell away from us. That's the more realistic version of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you need to step out now. This is too much. I also felt like there was a little too much empathy provided by these ER staff. They're very vested in getting every detail right. Like that one kid who comes in who's made a threat online. She's a resident, I think.
I think so.
With the one with the ankle bracelet. She very much pursues this to the very end because she doesn't want him to hurt anybody. And she goes above and beyond to make sure that he is dealt with. In reality, you have to move on to the next thing. You stabilize your patient and move on. So a little too much empathy. I appreciate the empathy, but it would be difficult to actually do that in real life.
That may be very inaccurate, but I do actually like that as a point of the show. Not that it's realistic. It's not like every doctor has that level of empathy. It seems like only things that strike a particular nerve. So for her, she probably had some kind of experience in the past. She literally, you see these things emerge over the course of the show. But when she confronts him in that final conversation, saying that like words are violence, so then you start thinking like she has had this abusive jerk of a husband as well, but maybe a pattern of abusive relationships. So she's thinking like, you're just writing something down, but there's consequences to your words. And then we have Dr. Santos, the student doctor, how she is very upset about, which of course is a very upsetting story anyway, but you can imagine that some doctors are like, it's unknowable what this is, I'm going to let it go. But then we find out that she specifically had someone older in her life that, sexually assaulted her and one of her friends, and her friend ended up committing suicide. So, of course, the suicide is also something that resonates with her. So I like the fact that it's not like everybody has this level of empathy. It's very much tied to their personal biography, which is character development itself. And it's not always positive character development. Speaking of that boy who, Dr. McKay, has this thing in her head that she wants to make sure someone takes action. Ravi, who's like so sympathetic in so many, he's like a total jerk to her about that, just being like, you're railroading him. He wants to give this guy every possible break in case he's innocent, and she's thinking like, no, what if this is this guy? And Ravi's still trying to cover for him. It makes you think, not explicitly in the show, but it makes you think like, what's his background?
Yeah.
Did someone falsely accuse him of something? Or was he, when he was young, was he this type of character? And he's like, well, if no one gave me a chance, I would be, I never would have gone to medical school or whatever would have happened. So it's interesting that it's part of the character development of the show.
Yeah, that's a good point. It does involve a lot of their personal experience and how they're motivated to pursue what's going on with their patients. That one case that you talked about, this kid comes in blue from the mass casualty event, and he's not hypoxic. And Dr. Santos pursues it. And
Blue plus blue equals pink.
There you go. And they diagnose him with methemoglobinemia and treat him with methylene blue, which is the treatment for that. She's trying to figure out why. Like, how did this happen? He doesn't admit to using any anesthetics or any other medications or drugs that could have caused this problem. And then she mentions that there's a suicide kit that you can order, which I presume is how her friend met her demise. And she pursues it and then asks him more questions, and he doesn't admit to being suicidal, but we get to the point where we've figured out that he tried to hurt himself. And she only pursued that because of, like you said, her friend. There is definitely personal motivation going on. I'm
no expert at ER, so I didn't watch it. And maybe I would have loved ER just as much if I'd watched it back in the day. But for me, it's just like, obviously all TV back then was this type of show. So I just kind of said, I really don't like these type of very episodic type shows. And of course, then we had this whole cycle of Prestige. But this does feel a little bit different because, like I mentioned, I think that there is other stuff that is being developed, like, you would expect in a Prestige show. It's just very subtly developed in the show, which it gives you the best of both worlds. And for me, that's why I put it on the top of my list. There was one medical show that I always liked a lot, though, and I think you watched all of this too, which was House, because of course House is directly...
I did like House, yeah.
House is directly a Sherlock Holmes metaphor, and his address is the same address, the number, as Sherlock Holmes' address in the books. So what's his name? Patrick, whatever his name is, the other guy who was his best friend. So that's his... Watson, I should say, and he had a Moriarty, which was the hospital administrator. So there's all these things that parallel Sherlock Holmes. But I really like that show because, of course, we had all the drama of the doctors that develops very slowly over the course of the show. But I also love that, it's just the mystery of the week. Like, how do you solve this? That show, by the way, is hilariously inaccurate. Also takes place in New Jersey, right down in Princeton. And I love how they're like, oh, we think this guy might have ingested this. I'm going to send one of my doctors out of the hospital. The exact opposite of this show, by the way, where you have, you're overwhelmed and every doctor, all hands on deck. These doctors, half of his staff is like, go break the window at this guy's apartment.
They're like private investigators. They get to leave work and become detectives.
And literally, like I'm going to put a brick through this guy's window to find out like what he ate this morning. I'm like, what the hell is going on in the show? But I loved it. I love that show.
I forgave all of that ridiculousness because I did like the show. The other medical show that I really liked was Scrubs, which was obviously a comedy.
That's one of Sona's favorite shows ever.
It was absolutely hilarious. And I wish I could watch it again.
You can watch it again. And Scrubs is coming back for a new season this year. They're reuniting. So you get to, maybe we'll cover that on the podcast too.
Yeah, that's like comic relief compared to the drama of the Pitt.
All right. We can leave it there for now, and we could keep exploring all these themes when we start covering the show week to week, which starts in 1 week, exactly to the day, if I publish this on time, exactly to the day 1 week from today. So binge it if you haven't already. If you don't have HBO Max, then watch it on TBS. TBS has been showing 2 or 3 episodes every single week, and they're all available on demand on the TBS app. And that's, of course, if you live in the U.S., check it out. Oh, and along with also coming on HBO, Industry, season 4 of Industry, a very fun and very trenchant show as well about the current financial industry and how it manipulates all of our, economy. And Darren and I will be watching that week to week. So 2 HBO Max shows. And Sona and I, so many shows now, Sona and I will be discussing Hijack on Apple TV Plus. So binge that one if you haven't. That show is a blast. It's only 8 episodes long. It's like a modern Die Hard with Idris Elba. He's now on a train. He was on a plane in the first season. Now he's on a train in the second season. All that is to come this week. Kim, is there anything specific that you were looking forward to of those shows, or anything specifically else that you were looking forward to this upcoming season?
Way to put me on the spot, Victor. You know full well that I don't know anything that's on TV unless you tell me about it.
It's Scrubs, the Scrubs reboot.
So thank you, Victor, for giving me recommendations for television, because you are in the know at all times when it comes to this. And same thing with current events. Victor gives me little pieces of the news as I clean the kitchen. He also gives me all of his advice on TV watching, and I do appreciate it, because a lot of these shows I would not have even known existed. And I've watched a lot of the ones you've covered. So I will take your recommendations. Perhaps I will watch Industry.
You got a lot of catching up to, though. 3 seasons.
That's a problem.
Yeah, that's my job here. That's my as I said to Darren this week when he was struggling to do his top 10 and he had to restart multiple times, and he goes, "This is hard, Victor." And I'm like, that's why I make the big bucks.
Thank you for having me, and maybe we can chat about the Pitt again. I also like that we didn't give any real spoilers to that show.
Yeah.
I wasn't even thinking of that.
I don't think you could spoil that show, to be honest, right? Like, if we were going to talk about your friends and neighbors.
We didn't even tell them what the mass casualty event was. Yeah. So that was good.
Yeah, it is good. Something big happens. So hang in. If you only saw half the show, it gets much more action-packed towards the end. So, but I think everybody knows that by now. The show's been around for an entire year. So,
well, if people are like me, they don't.
People who listen to this podcast know about the Pitt.
Okay, fine. I'm going to have all of my medical friends listen to this.
Yes. Anybody out there who wants to encourage their friends to watch the Pitt, send them this episode. There you go. That's something you can do for the new year. Help us grow our audience by sharing these episodes with your friends. Thanks again.
Thanks, Victor.